My name is Barbara Cooper and I'd like to welcome you to this series of videotapes that we're making for the non-florist. This one is all about flowers for funerals, which unfortunately is a very sad subject. But people have expressed a desire to actually give flowers themselves to the bereaved family. And so I've decided it would be a nice thing to do to show you how to do some fairly simple arrangements that you can either pick from the garden or you can get the flowers from your local florist. We are later on in the end of the video going to be doing some fairly complicated cushions and pillows, but you don't have to do those, and if you've seen how to do them and you think you can have a go, then it's a nice thing to be able to give something that looks like it's been produced from a proper florist. You're going to need quite a bit of greenery. You can either get this from the garden or from local people's gardens, or you can go down to your florist and buy them. Because a lot of the flowers we're using today you will have to actually go out and buy. Like these beautiful longy lilies, which look just beautiful, just tied together with a piece of greenery at the back. This simple tied arrangement is very easy. You're literally just going to need 3 or 4 stems of lilies, some background greenery and some either string or wool to tie at the bottom. I'm just going to tie off very simply with one knot because I'm not trying to keep them together too much, and I'm going to cut them off a bit shorter because that way they're not untidy. Like that, and I'm just going to put a small bow at the bottom. Yellow goes quite nicely with the lily because it has a yellow stamen. Take this off here. In fact, if you look closely in the lilies, you will find that they have this yellow stamen right in the middle here. Do be careful that you don't get this on your clothes, especially if you're going to be dressed up when you go to see somebody and you're going to be carrying them. This pollen stains and it is very, very difficult to get off your clothes. So you could actually just take those stamens out. I like them in, but if you wanted to, you could just remove them so that you're sure that there's no pollen going to be spread on anything else. Right, to make the bow, we just strip the ribbon down because I don't need a very big bow. I'm just really covering the piece of string at the bottom. And I'm going to just do a simple bow by pulling it together in the middle between my fingers, like this. Because this ribbon strips any width you want it to be, you could either make it the full width or 3/4. This is in fact half. I'm going to leave one end a bit longer than the other. And then I'm going to take one streamer because I need this to tie the bow in the middle. Turn it over and tie it with a knot at the back. I usually do mine twice. Then this bow can be put by tying the string that you've just got. You just tie it at the bottom. I usually take mine round a couple of times and tie it at the front. Take this off because it's a bit long, and then we strip it so that it curls and it's not going to get hooked up in anything. And the ones that we've got on either side, we can do the same for those. Lilies come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. You get the beautiful arum lilies, If you're going to buy those, you have to be really careful how you tie them or how you use them, because they have very thick fleshy stems and they're quite difficult to actually get into Oasis, or when you tie them you tend to tie the knot straight through. Take that off there, it's got itself hooked. Right, that's very simple. It's just 3 lilies tied together with a bow and some yew at the background, or you could use your sugar pine or laurel. The tied bunch is one of the simplest ones that we can do, and I think the nicest things to use are the red roses, especially if it's for somebody that's very close to one. You're going to need obviously red roses and some greenery which you use as a backing. Here we have a selection. We have 3 different types of laurel. We have the small leafed laurel, the variegated laurel, and the larger commoner laurel which most people would have if they've just got ordinary type of gardens. If you're lucky enough to have a yew tree, or you're living close to a cemetery or somewhere that has old yew trees that have grown the bushes at the bottom, then this is ideal because it's nice and feathery. Other than that, you can go to a florist and you can buy sugar pine or leylandi. Leylandi is also a very common a hedging plant nowadays, and you're going to need bits taken off for cutting, so use that if not. It's quite a simple process. You're going to need either a ball of string. This is what we call mossing string, which you can get from your florist, or if you use wool, a good quality strong wool, probably brown or green if you can get that. And you're literally going to start off by tying the stems together. So you're going to need a tallish one and a thinnish one as your back. Obviously you're going to need a pair of scissors with a good grip in the middle here. These are floristry scissors which have a segregated bit in here for cutting thick stems and wires, which we will need later on. Right, so you take your backing and you start off by tying your string to the base. Leave a little tail, and if you're lucky enough to find that at the end, you can cast off by tying onto it. Sometimes I can't find it once we've got to the end of the project. Right, you start by laying on the next piece of greenery so you've got a good base. I suggest you have a fairly good working area because it's not very easy to hold because it gets quite heavy, so, and you need to twist at one side. So if you have it on a table, and we're going to make a triangle shape across here. Now the roses, the roses are good, but on the other hand they do tend to droop. So if you wanted to, you could get some green, long green wires which we can put along the stem. You literally make a little prick at the top of here with the wire and push it in and twist it in between the leaves so that you can't see the wire too much. And these are nice thick stemmed roses, so they don't really need wiring, but if it's left out of water for any length of time, the heads will go wobbly. So that's what you could do if you wanted to do that. It's good for the top ones anyway, in case they get knocked. Also, the roses tend to have an outer petal which has markings on them. These are the guard petals, so if you want to, you can just take off the 2 outer petals so that you get a perfect rose inside. This is a very thick stem, which is quite, we put this at the back because it's good and stiff. I've already taken off the bottom leaves here, but you'll probably need to take off some more as we progress down. So we're going to start off by putting 1 rose at the top and 1 on either side to form a triangle. And you bind those onto your base foliage tightly. Do it 2 or 3 times so that you know you've actually got it. I have to put this on the floor, because otherwise it's in the way, like that. Then a bit more foliage as you come down. You could use a fern if you wanted to. You can buy leatherleaf fern from the florist, which is quite nice for doing with these as well. I'm using a dozen roses here because it's a significant number. Unfortunately, if you're buying them wholesale, you'll find they'll come in tens, so you're going to have to forego some of them if you have to buy 20. Gypsophila is a favourite thing to add to red roses, so if you want to use the Gypsophila, then put that in as you go down from the top. Binding in as you go. The foliage, you'll find, will help to keep the stems from coming together too much. It's quite a tricky bit to keep the knob of the stems here from twisting round, so that you'll end up with a bunch that gets tied together in the middle there like that, which is, you're trying to get a triangle shape, isn't too good. Also the string's annoying because it catches over the bottom of the stems as you're going. Just going to put a bit of Leylandii in here to bulk it up so I can put the next roses in. 1, 2, 3, 4. Put one here, one in the middle. It's not a tied bunch as you would buy it the modern continental style, where the stems are done as a spiral. These are actually crossing over and binding in to each other. So when you get to the back, you'll have a column of the string coming down, holding them all together. Keeping it nice and tight as you go over. Don't forget that the stems will cross over slightly, but you'll need to keep them separate with the bits of green in between. So binding it in with each piece that you put onto it. I haven't bothered to wire these roses because they're very stiff stemmed, and as I said before, if they're very thin, then you'll need to put the wire up the stem just to keep them steady so they don't get knocked over in the hearse or in the final crematorium or the cemetery, because their heads will get broken. You want about 3 pieces at the bottom here that are fairly similar, so that you're getting the sort of the square bit of the triangle at the base here. Whoops. The annoying thing is when you've got as far as this and you pull too tightly and you snap the string and you have to start all over again. It's not too good. One there and one there, because we're going to put a bow here, so you don't want to hide the flowers behind the bow. One final piece of gyp. I'm going to cut these stems off because A, they're in the way, and B, we don't need them as long as this, in a neat fan across here. You can tidy those up later on when you've got your bow on then, if they're still too long. I like to bring a bit of foliage just across the string, just to cover it. in case the bow doesn't quite cover it all up. Right, now if you're lucky and you can find the piece that you started with, you can tie it to it. Oh, that's quite good because it's actually here. Turn it over gently and tie the two pieces together tightly. Sometimes I wind it around a stem and bringing it up so that it's a good firm knot. So that you have a nice neat backing on the back like that. And I'm going to show you how to make the bow for the end now. It's up to you. Some people just like to leave it perfectly plain, and if you wanted to, you could just put a bit more foliage at the bottom here, so it just covers that, or even a piece laid this way on the back, just so that it covers the string up. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a red bow to go with the red roses, because sometimes nowadays people actually give the flowers away afterwards to a home or something like that. So it's not very nice to have a big funerally type bow, but a red roses with a red bow isn't too funerally, and it's quite nice so that you can give them as a present afterwards. Just move that out of here so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to take this stripping ribbon because it's waterproof, because you're going to need to keep these in water until you actually need to use them or to take them with you, because obviously the roses, once they're out of water, will start the drooping session going. So we want a bow with a trail on the end. So we're going to loop it a couple of times like this. I'm going to use the bow with a wire on it because it's secure then and it's not going to fall off. So you're going to do 2, 3 or 4 or possibly 5 bows and a nice trail at the end here. And we take a green wire. This is green coated so it won't rust. But if you haven't got those and you've only got the ordinary stub wire, which is not green coated, then that will do perfectly well. But the green coated one saves your fingers from getting very rusty from the wires. And we hold it between the 2 fingers at the back and the thumb, and we're bringing the slightly longer end around, catching the bow at the back all the way around. Leave the stems as they are like that for the time being, and we're going to strip these down into 3. Then either with a knife or the pair of scissors, you run the ribbon between your scissors and your finger, and the ribbons will curl. It's a bit like running your nail down the blackboard, but once you've done it, it's done. If you over twirl it very tightly like that, then if you run it on the opposite side, it'll straighten out again. So you can correct something if you've done it wrongly. Right, you take your bunch and you tie the bow. Now you could do, if you wanted to, just run a piece of ribbon around like that to start off with, so that it's hides the string, but we're going to hide the string with this ribbon anyway. Take it round underneath the bunch, and on the back side you twist the wires together very firmly and close together so that it's nice and firm and tight. Cut it off a little distant from there so that you can bend these pieces into your string so you don't catch yourself on them when you pick it up later on. And then we're going to take the 2 strands, the 2 long, some of them are longer than the others if you notice. We're going to take those 2 of the long ones on either side of the bunch, and cross them over at the back. And then we're going behind the bow and crossing over again and bringing them round to the front and then just tying them off like that. And if they're still too long, then you can either curl them a bit more or just cut them off with your scissors. That way you have a tied bunch with a nice red bow. And of course you're going to need your card, because you can't send things without a card because nobody will know who they're from. So the florists all do different cards, different wording on them, all perfectly plain, it's up to you. And then you can also get the cellophane envelope, which is clear, so it'd be difficult for you to see. So you write your message and you pop the card into the cellophane envelope. Usually there's a side that's slightly longer on one side, which is the side that will turn over onto the back. So that you put the card facing the longer side. Just turn it over and sellotape this end. And then you take a wire and you push it through the corner of the card and bring the sides down like this to make a hairpin with one long end, and you twist the shorter side round because you want the length to push into the bunch like that. This means that you can actually move your card in any direction. You could use the prong, which the card just slots into like that if you wanted to. The only thing with that is it's solid and you can't move the card in any direction, which for some of the things we're going to do later on, it makes it stick out in an awkward angle. So if you put them on a wire, you can then move the card and you just push it through the foliage, through your stems to the other side and bend it back into the mossing string that we've got at the back, so that you can move the card then where you want it to be. For starting with the base work, we're going to do the double-ended arrangement or double-ended spray or sheaf, depending on what you want to call it. This also would double up as a long arrangement for putting on top of the coffin. Depends how big you want it. If you're going to do one to actually fit on the coffin in one go, then you're going to need it about 3 to 4 feet long at least. If you really wanted a huge one, then you're going to need at least 6 feet of it, which you'd need a longer tray. You can get a tray that's double this width, double this length, and then you can put 2 blocks on it. We're just going to do the one with a single block. So you're going to need a block of wet foam, either Oasis or one of the other manufactured ones. When it comes, it's dry and you soak it, and it needs to soak in a bucket of water or a bowl of water until it's sunk below the level of the surface. That means that all the inside bubbles have come out and it's perfectly soaked all the way through. Then you'll need this black tray, which is a nice flat dish, and you will need some form of keeping it onto this. We're going to use the pot tape. This comes in 2 widths as well. This is the thinner of the widths. You will need to make sure, if you're going to use it as a coffin top, that you actually secure it on very well, because you don't want it sliding off this base. So you'll need one to go across lengthways, and I suggest you don't put it dead in the middle, because you're going to need the main amount of flowers in the centre, and if you've put your tape there, it's extremely difficult to get the flowers around the tape. So if you put it slightly off centre and bring it down, you need to make sure that your dish at the bottom is not wet, because it won't stick to it if it is. So And if you cross over at the back so that it seals onto itself, oops, like that, then it's more of a chance for sticking on. And then we usually do 3 lots going across widthways like this. Again, make sure that it goes right the way round and you bind onto it underneath. Because you're going to have a lot of weight on this block, so make sure that it's well secure. I don't recommend elastic bands for this type of thing because they can split and get brittle and then they'll just break off. Also they'll cut into the oasis, which will eventually make a big hole in it. Just do one slightly off centre there. Right, so now we have the dish, the oasis, and it's well taped on. To start off with, then you're going to need your foliage. It's always a good idea to start off with your foliage first as a base because you can see where you're going, and you'll need to make like a big frill around the edge for the length and width you need. The laurel's very good foliage for this. If you cut it off at an angle with a sharp knife, this is a floristry knife which is very sharp, so that you can push in and you don't make too big a hole. And for the basing, you need to start always at the bottom of the block. So all the foliage is going to come out right level with the top of the dish. Take off any surplus leaves and just cut at an angle. Do make sure that you keep the knife away from children because these little floristry knives are very sharp. Very good if you want to cut up onions and things, but not too good for children's fingers. You want it about equal distance on either side, the length that you're obviously going to need it. This is quite a long one. I'll try and bring it in a bit, otherwise you won't see the edges very well. So they're the 2 flat ends. And we're going to put the 2 side ones in like this on either side. If you cut the branches in between, if they're too long, then this piece can be used in a minute at a later date. Make sure you push them in firmly, not too far so they stick out the other side, but firm enough so that they're not going to be pulled out. And the same at the other end. Now laurel is quite a deep greenery, so that you don't need too much of it, otherwise it gets a bit overpowering. Need one more piece for the back of here. If you get any really bad leaves, then make sure you nick those off before you get them in your arrangement, because you'll forget about them at a later date. Pop that one over this side. So you've got like a spray all the way round. You can make it longer and thinner if you wanted to on the ends, and it's about the width that you're going to be needing anyway. I hasten to add, this is a big version. If you're only doing a small double-ended, then obviously you don't need it as long as that. If you haven't got laurel and you haven't got Leylandii or anything to hand, then the florist will have this, which is leatherleaf fern. This one actually comes from South America, but if you live in Cornwall, you'll probably have something that's fairly similar to this, that actually grows wild. So you can use your points with this. Just pop a bit in at the bottom of there to show you how to do that. Like all ferns, you need to keep them well watered. It's as soon as it starts getting dried out, they turn, the feathers turn in, and then they don't look so good. But when they're open flat, then they're very pretty. This is yew, which would be the same as Leylandii, if you were going to use Leylandii. It's a good basing background because it's thin, but it's a nice dark green, and it's quite a traditional tree to use for this kind of work. It's also fairly easy to get hold of if you live near so either unkept or well-kept cemeteries, because these tend to grow at the bottom of the old trees. Don't get too filled up, otherwise you'll lose the base. So we'll just do that for the time being, and we'll start with the flowers, and then we can fill in any gaps we have later on. I'm going to use some blue iris and some gypsophila and some spray carnations to start with. Now the gypsophila, being very light and airy, wants to be toward the edges of your arrangement, so making sure you recut the stems, you can push these in so it'll form a frill round the edge. One right up to the top up here. And one round to this bottom bit at this end. The only thing with gypsophila is it does tend to mat together, and as you pull it apart, the fronds tend to bend at the stems, and then the water doesn't get up. As most of this stuff comes from Israel or from the Channel Islands, it tends to be a bit weak here if it's abroad, because it's grown in greenhouses and they're a bit thin sometimes. In the summer times when it's the season for it, it's lovely and stiff, and you don't have the problem of them bending. Just a little bit to give you an outer design. Then we're going to put the spray carnations in. Now, with spray carnations you can usually double up on the amount that you actually have, because if I take that one off there, I'm still left with 2, which is a very good point for the outer edges. So I'm going to use this one at this end, right to the edge of your foliage, because they're your marker points. Make sure you push these in fairly well, because these are the bits that are going to be bendy at the end of when it's picked up at the end of the arrangement. Following the same line that you did with the foliage, one on either side. So you've got like 1, 2, 3 on either side, so that it's equal when you look at it from above. 1, 2. If they're slightly offset, so they're not level with each other, so you've got one slightly higher than this one on this side, like that. Then these pieces that you've cut off, you can push in at the sides. Don't come out too far, because otherwise you'll be trailing over the side of the actual coffin, or if it's you're just doing a double-ended to give, then it makes it a bit too wide. Keep the bigger open flowers for the centre, so you've got an edge. Now, spray carnations do tend to take a while to come out, and these have been in water for about 3 days now, and they're only just beginning to open up. So if you've gone to the florist and they are very tight, then you need to get those in sort of almost up to a week before you need to use them to get them to come out to any size. Right, then we'll put in the outer edges, just coming short of your spray carnations at the end. Now, if you notice, I'm still keeping all the stems to the bottom of my block, because the top bit we're going to need for the infill in a minute. So the 2 iris on either side about equal distance. And again, coming slightly further in to the spray carnation. So we've got one again on either side coming in slightly. cut at an angle so you don't make too big a hole in the oasis like that. So we've got 1, 2, 3 on either side. And for the fillers, we're using the double white chrysanthemum. You can get this in the single or the double. The double doesn't have the nice yellow centre, which looks more like a marguerite. It usually is fairly thick on the head as well, so we can cut these down and use them for different sections as we want to go along. This is also the basing chrysanthemum, which we're going to need at a later date. So the pieces that if you've managed to get any from the end, will go at this end because they're the shorter piece, the ones with the least amount of heavy head. And these can come at the side to start filling in your block on each side. If you're neat where you cut off, it's quite a job to see when you turn it the top side where you've actually cut it. It looks like it's one stem then. Don't throw away these leaves because you can actually use these in the block if you push them in gently if you're short of foliage, like that. They have to be pretty good leaves though, otherwise they just flop. Now I'm going to use the centre, I'm going to put in some Stargazer lilies. Now the Stargazer is one of the nicest of the lilies, I think. It has this beautiful head which has this darker burgundy colour in the middle going to this white shading on the outside. It also has some very good pollen stamens in, like we'd said before with the longi. You'll need to take these off because they get very heavy with the pollen. As these open, these get very pollen laden and they just about get on everything. So just nip these out. It'll also help to keep the lily lasting a bit longer as well. But mind, because you'll get yellow stamen smears all over your fingers if you're not careful, and it looks like you've had a smoking fit for the last 10 years. Looks like nicotine staining. So you want to put in your centre point, which is why we've left both the gap in the middle so that we can put in these as a group at the middle here. Don't get too tall. In fact, that's almost getting a bit tall because if it's going to be used as a coffin top or coffin spray, the undertaker's car roof here will just catch this top bud if you're not careful. So you need to keep it almost within 6 inches if you can. I think I better drop that just a little bit like that. You could use arum lilies in the place of these, or you could use the longi lily, but I think these stargazers, not only do they have a most wonderful smell, but they're beautifully dominant as well. And you can use these pieces of stem as foliage as well if you're short. And these will open up quite quickly, so once they've broken, started to break like that, then they will open up in the sunshine. A bit of a warning though, if you're going to buy longi lilies or any of this particular type of lily, they do take an absolutely age to start opening if they're very tight. If you've bought them and they're this tight when you actually get them, they're going to take almost a week to sort of get to open like this. We've had these since the weekend, which is 5 days from now, and they've only just opened up like this. And the longi are even worse. You need those in a week beforehand, really. So if you order them from your florist, make sure that you get them in the week before tight and put them in a in a warm place, not hot, but just a nice warm temperature, and keep an eye, and if they start to open, then put them out in the cool so they don't open anymore. So now we've got our middle bit in, we can put a line of carnations in between them, and it's quite a nice idea to start off on one side and work through so you get a crisscross effect when you actually look down, so you have a line coming this way. You can do your own designs then. You can decide if you want a line coming this way or one just a clump in the middle, or whichever you'd like to do. This one I'm going to bring across the centre here. So that it's equal on either side. This one has obviously got something wrong with it. If you look at it, the top here hasn't opened at all properly, and it's very soft here.
If you pick it up, we'll start with it from there.
If you look at this one here, you can see that it hasn't properly opened and it's very soft. It's not going to be any good whatsoever. You can see that it's not looking anything like that should be. So just throw that one away. Right, we'll carry on coming across here so that we get our line. These ones in the middle are going to be shorter, obviously. The idea is that when you look on it from the top, you'll see your line quite definitely through the middle here. Let's push this one a bit shorter. And where they cross over, you can bring them on either side just to make a centre more definite, like that. Try not to come across top of this point here. Well, roses, we've already seen the red roses. These ones are called Pink Bride. They're also, unfortunately, very prickly. So we need to take A, the leaves off, and B, these thorns, because they will get hooked up in people that actually touch the flowers. And you really need a knife for this, and you hold the flower. I tend to hold it this way up, it's up to you, because I can come down against the thorns. And you start off with the top thorn and you just nick it off with the knife like that, and then you twist it around. They tend to go in a spiral, and you just nick off each thorn as you go down, just twisting it slightly as you go so that you get them on the both sides. Be careful where they go to, because otherwise you'll find you'll be standing on them, and if you've got bare feet, you'll soon know when you get a rose thorn in. These bottom leaves you would take off anyway. I would suggest that you do this before you actually start arranging the flowers, because you don't want to have to stop and do this in the middle. Also, roses like to have a sharp angled cut here so that they can absorb the moisture as best they can. They don't like oasis very much because they can't get enough water up. So mostly you see roses just put into vases. And then you can actually wire them if you want to stop the heads going over, as we did before, if they're going in the outer extremities of the... Just push the wire in and twisting it in between the leaves. I would suggest also that you get the flower food, and when you buy the roses you must obviously recut them and stand them in a bucket which has the flower food dissolved in it, because that way they will take up enough nutrients to keep them going once they've been put into the oasis. Sometimes you'll find that the rose leaves really don't actually help, so just nip them off if you think that they're going to cover the head up. There's another one here. We'll just dethorn this one. As I said, really we don't need these leaves, so we'll take those off as we go down. So we have one on this side. I've got one this side on here, and I'm going to have one on the other side over there. I shan't bother to wire them up now. I've shown you how to do them once. That's up to you. These ones I've already dethorned, otherwise we're taking ages just showing you how to dethorn. Also, you could always take the outer petals off as well if you want to clean them up if they've got messy outer petals. Keep the buds for the ones that you're going to have in the middle with the point, so that it shows up nicely like that. I would wire that one up in actual fact, because that one is the one that's going to get the most physic from getting knocked. The rose leaves are quite useful because you can do the same as you do with chrysanthemums. You can cut off a bit so you've got a nice stem on it, and you can use those in as a base leaf as well. And also you can use the ones that you have on the stem, cut a bit of stem with a leaf in and just pop it in the middle if you haven't got any other bits of foliage. In fact, you can almost do a whole arrangement by using the waste leaves from the bits that you've cut the heads from. So I've got my carnations coming that way, and I've got the roses roughly going that way across the middle. Right, so that's going in there. Sure. Take rid of these rose leaves and the carnation stems. It's quite good to have a box to throw your rubbish into, because you do tend to get a big heap of rubbish down on the floor if you're not careful, which means you get high and the arrangements get lower. Right, really it's a matter now of infilling with the chrysanthemums, filling up any gaps that you might have showing, intermingle them so it's not all dead level with just the carnations and the other things in the middle. We've got the irises stuck at either end at the moment, so we need to fill in a bit, use those on the edges so that they doesn't make it look as though it's just stuck out at the outer extremities. Spray carnations just to fill in from these pieces. Just a few more iris. Pull these in a bit closer so they don't stick up too high. make sure you push them in properly. Now irises have a life of about 2 to 3 days, so don't do this up too early, and especially if they've come out and they're fairly well open, because they don't last too long. But they are quite good for going outside. So if you're going to make a spring arrangement for going outside, either for you know, a grave that's you're going to put flowers onto, then the spring flowers are very good, because they will they will freeze and unfreeze naturally without going all brown. Right, I can't see what we've got on our side, this side, but my side hasn't got that many gaps in it. Trouble is, you don't know really where to stop, and you tend to get more and more flowers in as you go, seeing a gap at every quarter. Hopefully when you finish, you should have an arrangement that looks a bit like an upturned boat on both sides, fairly similar. Because most people are going to be seeing this upwards, so you want to make sure that you haven't got any gaps at the bottom. If it's just a double-ended spray or sheaf that you're going to take and lay outside with other flowers, it doesn't matter so much, because people are going to be looking down on it rather than up at it. But if it's going to be used as a coffin top, you must make sure that these outer edges are well filled in, because there's nothing worse than seeing a massive gap when you're looking at it from underneath. Some people like gyp and some people don't. Gives a nice airy appearance to it. If you haven't got any gypsophila in the summer, you could use the cow parsley from outside, because that's quite pretty and feathery as well. Right, I think that's more or less finished. If you've got any gaps on your side, please excuse me, because I can't see very well. But I don't think there should be too many. There's a gap in here. Just use a chrysanthemum head in here. This way, you see, we've got flowers that are lower in and some that are higher, so it's not just a big blob. You've got depth and light to the arrangement as well. This is quite a big one, as I said, so you could make it half the size and half the width. And then it wouldn't be too overpowering for you to take as a normal mourner. If I clear the table like that, and then you can, don't forget to put your card in. I usually find it's a good idea to bend the wire up at the bottom slightly, so you've got like a little hairpin at the bottom. That way that it can't be dragged out by mistake. Once you've pushed it in, it'll hook back into the oasis and it's more difficult. And then you can bend your card round where you want it to fit in. Or of course you could use the prong if you haven't got the wire. So that then is your double-ended or coffin spray. Well, the double-ended was huge, so I'd like to show you how to do a single-ended, because that isn't so big, and you can make it maybe only a couple of feet in length. We tend to use a shovel or a tray which has a handle on it, because it's easy for you to pick up that way and carry it. This is a block that I've cut more or less to fit the tray. It was a big block and I've cut it into a quarter and it just fits in nicely into there. But we are obviously going to need to put the tape on. I'm going to put it at an angle across, again, not hitting the middle on either side, just to keep it on there like that. And again, making sure it connects on itself as we go around. That's that way, and one just to go across. Toward the front is easy because that's the side that's going to have the most weight on it. So you have a block which is now taped to the tray. Well, for a single-ended we don't need the foliage coming out this side. This side we're going to do a trick question in a minute with a hand-tied. So we're going to start off by making it come as a triangle shape in this direction. Now you can either use Leylandii or laurel or sugar pine or any other foliage that you've got for this, for the basing. You decide how long you want it and obviously cut the piece to fit the length. There's a bad leaf there, so I'm just going to take that off. Again, you push it in at the bottom so that you've got all this space up here free. Don't forget to use the bits that you've cut off. I'm just going to make it more or less a triangle at the bottom. Right, so I've got the top and the two sides there. 1, 2, 3 for the, just coming round like this. As you can see, the laurel is just coming into flower, which makes a quite nice addition to the arrangement. This will come out sort of a nice milky white colour, so it will be quite useful later on. If you have a leaf and you actually want to wire it up and use it in the centre, you can use the wire and you make a little stitch between that and the thick membrane at the back, the big rib at the back, and you push it through, pull it down and just twist the wire around at the end so it ends up by being on a wire like that. You can cut it off short. But this means that you can actually bend the leaf in any direction that you want, so it's quite handy. And you can push this in and use a single leaf if you're short of foliage. Just show you again. Take your leaf, do a little stitch 3/4 of the way up. This is a fairly thick wire. You could use a thinner wire if you wanted to. I'm just using this to demonstrate. Pull it down, twist it over the stem at the bottom by holding this firmly here, and then cut it off to the length that you want. This one's got a nick at the end which has gone brown, so you cheat by just making it prettier at the end. The laurel, especially if you have the bigger leafed variety, quite often get holes and things eaten into them, so you can just trim round the tops and make them a perfect leaf again. If you want to see different types of wiring, then we have done quite a large detailed sections in some of the other videos. We've done Flowers for Your Wedding, which has quite a large section on all different types of wiring and wires that you need to use. So if you're interested and you want to have a go at doing other types, then the Flowers for Your Wedding is the video for that as well. Right, daffodils are everybody's favourites for this time of year. This is springtime here, so we've got the daffodils out in the gardens. They've been in the florist shops since Christmas or before Christmas, November time we start with the daffodils. and they last for another month when they start coming down from Scotland where it's a bit cooler. So the daffodils also have a fairly weak stem quite often, and especially if they're bought ones, you might find you have a problem with narcissus or daffodils to actually push them into oasis. Now, the trick for that is that you find that they're hollow and they will take a wire up the middle here. So all you need to do is to take a wire, this is the green coated wire, and push it up, and you'll feel it come to a halt where this bit, the little neck bit here, starts. So what you need to do is to, with your finger, just level that, and with your thumb press so that it is kept steady, but it's kept level with the rest of the stem here. Then you push very gently through the top and into the flower head itself, going through this neck here, so that the flower head then is stiff and it's not going to be bent as that one is. Okay, because this one is difficult to arrange because the head doesn't necessarily go in the right direction. With them wired, you can then arrange them and push them in because the wire will make the hole for you. So you can push it in and actually get it well gripped by the oasis. So it takes a few minutes. You have to take a bit of time to do this, just pushing it through, holding the head and going through like that. But for spring flowers it's well worth it, because the daffodils, especially if you've got them in the garden, are nice things to use, because you can say, well, this is from me to you, and it's a nice gesture and people appreciate it as well. I actually did a cross once for a gentleman that died, and the widow said, would I make the cross from all the roses in the garden? So, and it was a very big garden, so, and they had massive rose beds. So I actually went round and I picked all the different coloured roses and made a cross from all the flowers that they had in their own garden, which was a nice sentimental thing to do for her. I'll do some more of those in a minute. Let's fill in a bit here. This is one of the types of Leylandi. It's quite a slow-growing rockery type. I'm not quite sure what it's called. It's bound to have a technical name that I don't know, but it's, in other words, it's very similar to the fronds of the Leylandi. I'm also going to use some Tokyo chrysanths, but I don't need them as such a heavy dollop on the stem, so I'm just going to cut some of them off. And I can see already this one is going to split off. You have to wiggle them away. This has had that rot that I had told you about earlier. You can see that it's got dark pieces on the bottom of the petals there, and as I cut it the whole lot fell off. The ones on either side were all right. Now I've got a nice mess all over here. Right, so shake anything else off that's loose. That's lessened the amount on the head a bit, because otherwise it gets a bit top heavy, and these ones we can use further in the arrangement. Right, so that's my piece at the end here. I'm also going to use some peach spray carnations, because peach and yellows and creams go nicely together. And as you can see, this is taking on the shape of the original tied arrangement that we did at the beginning, except that you're using a block. So therefore you haven't got the problem of trying to tie it. As it's not likely to be going on the coffin because it's a small arrangement, you're not restricted on your height so much. Although these top ones really need to be wired because the undertakers are not always very clever with the flowers, and they do tend to knock them about a bit if they aren't careful. Just get some of these in, and then I'm going to use some yellow double chrysanthemum with the Tokyo, or the spider chrysanth as it's called as well. And you can actually do the whole arrangement with daffodils because they come in such nice colours nowadays, and you can have narcissus and other different colours as well. So you can make the whole arrangement if you've got the time. I would suggest, however, that you put the daffodils or the things that you've had to wire up first, because they've got fairly thick stem, and what happens is you've got all this crisscrossing of stems coming into a fairly small block. It's jolly difficult to get these in sometimes because they hit the stems, and so these ones want to go in first. Again, I'm cutting down the chrysanths because they're too heavy a head for the small one that I'm doing here. So I'm using individual heads. Sometimes you'll get a spray that's nice and light so that the whole stem can be used. But these are rather open, so they're a bit more difficult. Oops. Sometimes you'll have to start, if that one's bent, so I've got to take it out and push it in again, otherwise it'll not take the water up. I'm bringing these through mostly from this side to this side, just to make a design really through the centre of the arrangement here. You needn't throw away, sometimes the carnations actually have these shoots on the side of them. And when you get them certain times of the year, you'll find that they have a lot of these shoots on the side, and if you carefully pull them down out of its joint there, you'll get what's called a foot on the bottom. And if you just nip the tops of the leaves off so it doesn't need quite so much leaf, you want it to make roots, put it in a drop of rooting powder and put them around the edge of a flower pot and leave them, and they should root. Keep it well watered, and in the summertime then you'll have some nice carnations flowering in remembrance of the deceased, and you can always give them to whoever would like them for their garden then. Right, just infill with a few of these. Bit like confetti when you pull these apart. The bits come out everywhere. You can see the triangle shape coming up quite easily now. Let's just have a look, see how many bits we need in there. There's one in the centre here. Now then, at this end I've left it blank without any foliage in, and because it's a fairly short arrangement, it's supposed to be single-ended, so it's half the size of the other, and I can just finish it off with a bit of foliage to come over the edge like that. But if you want to cheat on a tide arrangement, because the trouble with the tide is that once they're out of water they'll get droopy, so keeping the stems that you've already cut from the flowers that you've used, you can make a false ending on here by adding a bow as well. So I'm just going to make a bow which will come onto the end of here. As we did with the red one, it's a bow with a looping, a squeeze, another loop, a squeeze, a loop, and a squeeze, like that, and a wire that twists round and pulled tight. But we're going to need it twisted at the back of here this time, because we're going to push it in this way round. I'm leaving them long this time, cut it off level at the end, and then do a nice little nick up, so you get like a bookmarker end on it, like that. Oops. And then this will push into the end with your wires, pushing it into the end like that, so that you have an arrangement with a bow on the end. And then the trick is then that you take off your stems that you've already used, and you pretend by pushing them into here like this that these are the stems of the flowers that you've already put in. You obviously have to take off the leaves, otherwise they won't push in properly. So the effect given is that you've actually got a tied bunch, and the stems represent the pieces that you've tied off with your string. You obviously put in as many as you feel that will make it look as though you've actually done the arrangement tied, getting at the right angle, otherwise the thing will look as though it's false. So looking at it from the side, the effect given is that it's a tied arrangement which is being held together with a bow, but in fact your handle is underneath here for you to pick it up as a single-ended sheaf. Don't forget to spray it and keep it in the cool till you actually need it. For doing a posy, the best thing are the green dishes, because it's not going to show up as much as the white. There are 2 or 3 different sizes. There's a size smaller than this, which it really is a bit too small. Then there's this size and the one with a square base, which is good for using outside because it's more sturdy and it's not so inclined to blow over, and also it takes a much bigger lump of Oasis in the first place. I'm however going to do the smaller one because that's nice for children to do or to give. First of all, you're going to need, well, I use an extra precaution on these. This is a frog, and this is the fix, which is like a bit like chewing gum really. It sticks to just about everything except for the bit you want it to stick to. It also won't stick if this dish is wet, so put it on first on the dry dish and push your frog into the middle like that. That gives an anchor for the Oasis foam to sit on. This is half a block of Oasis that we've had. If you're not going to use all of it, you need to keep it in a damp conditions, either in a plastic bag or in a water butt or in a bowl with some water in it. Whereas once it dries out, it's quite difficult to get the water to soak into it properly again. We don't need all this block, so I'm just going to cut this so that it's a piece better suited to this size dish. That's about it. This away. And this will just push onto the dish like that, nice and firmly. And then of course you can put your tape across it just to make sure. You would have to anyway because it would fall off that if somebody decided to tip it upside down. So put your tape across, again, not in the centre, but joining in either side. As it's only a small posy, I'm only going to put one across it. You could do two if you wanted to. Right. Whereas Leylandii is the most, well, generally the easiest foliage to get hold of, we're going to go around and make a frill around the whole edge with the Leylandii. And you can cut this off. You don't need great chunky stems. You only need the small bits from the side, so it's quite economical. I'm taking these cones off because I don't really want the cones on the end. So they go round like this. I'm turning it upside down because that way it's flatter. Take the cones off. If you twist it as you go, you'll get a much better circular pattern. Otherwise you tend to, if you're not careful, you get a bit that's sticking out a long way on one side. So really you're only going to need the fronds. So if you've only got a young bush, you're not going to take too much from it. If you take one or two stems. Pull off the bottom pieces of foliage as you go, because otherwise they'll get stuck in the Oasis and it makes a big hole as you try to put them in. And also any bits of brown that are on them. They get a bit brown if they're the bottom branches and they're underneath another hedge or at the back of the bush. They do tend to get these brown patches on them where it kind of dies off at the edge. So you'll end up with your Oasis with your circular pattern of Leylandii around it. Don't put any more in for the time being because you can fill in when we've got a bit further on. I'm just going to put a frill of gypsophil around. Again, I'm using the bottom of the Oasis and not touching this section up here as yet. This is quite good for using the bits that are broken off. If you're going to be doing one or two arrangements, then save the small pieces that you've cut off for using in this sized arrangement. Make sure they actually are pushed in quite well. But these are fairly thin stems, so you have to be careful you don't bend them. So you've got kind of a frill around it like that. Now we're going to use some freesias, spray chrysanths and some nice heather, because I think heather's lovely to use. And you can buy plants of this from a garden centre or from your florist and cut it and use it in the arrangement, and then you can put them in the garden afterwards. This is especially nice if it's for somebody who was Scottish or there was some Scottish in them somewhere. The chrysanths we've already cut down, so I'm just going to use some of the bigger heads in a bit tighter on. Because they're such a round shape, they tend to be quite dominant. Make sure you go all the way around the arrangement. All the little buds can come to the edge, or for your centre point in the middle. Like that. They're not all the same level. There are some lower, some higher. The higher ones are the ones that are the smaller ones. Then we've got some bits of the mauve aster or September flower. This comes nowadays, it comes into the florists all year round, or you might know it in the autumn as the Michaelmas daisy, so that it's a good plant as a herbaceous bedding plant, and it's a perennial, so it'll come up year after year, and it's very good for flower arranging. It's also very good for getting mildew on it as well, so you do have to watch that. But it's very good as an infill colouring, and mauve is very appropriate anyway. We're going to put some bows in a minute just to fill it in. So if you keep turning it as you go, so that you get the similarity all the way round. Cutting down the stems so that one or two stems you can get quite a lot of flowers from it, rather than looking at it and thinking, gosh, I've only got one stem. Freesias are everybody's favourites, and a lot of the funeral tributes that we actually do are asked to put freesias into them. They probably won't smell them on the day, but they're usually most people's favourite flowers and they like them included. It's always a nice thing to try and include the flowers that people actually like, if you know what they are. These are the Dutch freesias because they have a lot of buds on the actual stems. The ones that come from Guernsey or Jersey or the Channel Islands in general, and the ones that are from over here tend to only have the 5 stems of freesias in them. The Dutch tend to send them with all the side buds on as well. They will open up, but they take 2 or 3 weeks to open sometimes, so don't throw them away, especially as they're usually fairly more expensive than the ordinary local grown ones, so that you do get your money's value from them if you wait for them to open. Also, they make nice points for your flower arranging, as they are, even if they don't open up properly. Right. Now you can fill in any gaps with bits of foliage if you want to, that you have, if you've got any. This is a bit of hebe, which is very useful. And if you've got hebe in the garden, it's a nice foliage for flower arranging. It's not too heavy, and the stems are nice and strong to push into the foam. Right, for putting ribbons in, we're going to do small versions of the bigger bow that we did earlier, but without the trail on it. Move that over there. And we're going to use some thinner wires because I don't need them on the thick ones. We're just going to bow and push, bow and push, and bow and push together like that. Cut it off. So you've got 3 prongs. And then you hold the wire between your thumb and your forefinger. The shorter end keeps still. The top one just catches the top of the bottom of the bow together so that you end up with it looking like that on a wire. You will probably need a bit of practice to do this. Don't forget we've been doing it for a number of years now and we're quite quick at doing it, but to get them to actually splay apart like that you probably have to practice quite a bit before they actually look proper, as though you're going to be a proper florist and done them yourself. So it's bow and push, bow and push, bow and push. There's a bit left over, so we're just going to push it up like that. Twist it over at the bottom, put the wire in, twist it around the top, bring it down to the bottom, couple of twists, and it's on the wire. Bow, twist, bow. A couple of times round and catch it like that. Another way of doing it is not to actually make a bow, but to make a streamer. You don't need it so wide, you make them fairly thin, otherwise it gets a bit heavy. And you hold them at the top, and you put the wire between your forefinger and your thumb, make your hairpin, and twist it around the bottom of the ribbon like that, so that you've got them like a trail on at the end there. And holding it tightly, because sometimes you'll pull them out if you haven't got them very tightly tied at the bottom. You just run your fingers, as we did before, with your scissors or your knife, and twist it like that. Don't forget, if you over twist, run it on the opposite face. And the effect for that is that when you push them in to an arrangement, you can twist the ribbons through, so you get A, your gap filled in, and B, it looks like a nice trail coming out. Or you can use your bows to push in. The bows will last a lot longer outside. Obviously they will be there for a long time after the arrangement's finished, and so you can use them as a filler in, and to give you some other colour too. If you haven't got a lot of flowers, then you can use the bows as your colour. Just a bit of streamer at this end here, and I think we're finished on that. One, two, three. Right. There you go. If you wanted to put a little bit of jip in to the centre, like that, you could do. so it's not too much like a frill at the bottom. Gypsophila is called baby's breath, so if it's a young person who's died, then the Gypsophila is a nice thing to use. And it's nice and fluffy and looks pretty. This looks pretty for ladies because it's used with the pink flowers as well. It's very delicate. There we go. A round posy, done with the nice mauve and the white, which is quite a good colour. This is a cremation basket. We don't actually do anything with the basket as it sounds, but the thing is that it's flat on the bottom like this. It means it can't slide around too much. And it also has a nice deep cleavage down here so that the oasis will fit into here, and you've got quite a lot of space for putting water into if it's going to stay outside. I haven't actually put the frog on the bottom and the fix into here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to anchor the oasis by running a wire through the mesh of the basket and out at this side here, and then just twisting it on so that it can't fall out because it's got to go right through the block or pull itself out from the edges. So I twist it over on either side like that. Sometimes I do it from handle to handle. This one had a good weave at the end, so I've gone from end to end. Put the foliage in. Now, it depends what kind of shape you want to do. You can do a square shape, or you can bring it up slightly higher on this side. No higher than the handle though, because this will catch if you're not careful on the cars, etc. So push your foliage in. I haven't got too big a lump of foliage into here because most of it's going to come from the top. It's not going to hang over the sides for this one. You can use any basket, but this is the proper one for using for this type of arrangement. A piece of the laurel. I like to try and use different foliages if I can, because half the arrangement is made from the different foliages. I have some ivy leaves here, which will just go over the side like that. They make a nice focal point for things if you're trying to do a focal point in the middle here, like a rose or something. I'm also going to use some Singapore orchids because they're fairly cheap to buy, and you usually get 3 stems, and you also get a piece of greenery as well, this ladder fern, which is useful. It's a nice shape for sort of draping out of a basket or an arrangement. I'm going to use some of the white spray chrysanthemums and a bit of the gyp and some peach roses. Putting my gyp in first. That one's bent, so I'm just going to take that off, put it in a bit lower down. Not too much, just a little bit to make it light. It's always fairly expensive. People think it's going to be cheap because it's a very small flower, but it is usually sort of from £1 onwards for a stem, so you want to be able to spread it as far as you can. I'm going to bring the Singapore orchids out at one side here. I'm cutting it in half because I don't want it too tall for the middle. And then the pointy bit's just coming out on the side like that. And then the one at the back. It's got a nice curve to it. Peach roses I'm going to use fairly close in. A, because they don't like oasis, as I said before, and B, they'll last a lot longer if they've only got their heads pushed into the oasis anyway. This rose is called Gerda, or Gerdo. It's lovely peach colour, but it does tend to have these very bad outside petals, as we saw earlier. Just take them off. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as a group across the middle there. A few stems of spray chrysanthemum. I'm keeping it to fairly basic colours, just peach and white. I think things look nicer if they're in tones of colour or opposites, white being opposite. You've got a nice run of the peach in the middle. But if you get all the colours mixed in together, it becomes a bit of a mishmash. And you can't really see any design in it. It's a nice piece of heather here for putting in the back. There are some good freesias, the pure white ones. These are fairly backwards, they're only just beginning to open. So they'll open up in the next couple of days, which make a nice smell. This is quite a good arrangement for giving, if you know somebody's going to give the flowers to perhaps an old people's home or a family or something afterwards, and they're not going to just leave it and it get thrown away, then a basket is a good arrangement because it doesn't look too funerary in the first place, and it means that people can put them either in the hospital and people aren't going to say, oh gosh, you know, whose was that, in a nasty kind of way. They'll just think it's a lovely basket arrangement. And if you've left the card on, obviously they'll know who it's for. It seems such a shame to do the flowers and then have them just thrown away at the end of the week as from the crematoriums. It's nice to be able to take them back and to actually give them to somebody afterwards. It's quite a good idea perhaps if you don't want to do flowers, if you do a planted bowl, because you could buy, say, 3 polyanthus or primroses or even pansies and put them in a bowl with a bit of moss around the soil to stop them showing that they've just been planted. And it's quite nice because they can actually leave that outside if it's a cemetery or a graveyard, and they'll stay out there, and then they can always plant them at a later date, you know, into the ground themselves. And it's a nice gift really that can actually keep going for a little bit longer than the cut flowers. I'm just going to make a trail for the front here. I've stripped some of the peach ribbon down, or the orange ribbon. It's a bit darker than the peach. I'm just going to twist it up and twist it. Don't forget to hold it tight, otherwise you'll pull it through your fingers and you'll have to start all over again. Oops. One hasn't quite done, then just do the end with a little twist at the end. Personally, I don't like ribbons, but if you wanted to, you could just put a small ribbon in like that, or even a bow if you wanted to. I haven't put one on the handle because I think it looks better without the bow on the handle for this kind of work. It doesn't take too long, it doesn't take too many flowers either, and it's just a nice gift for somebody to pass on once they've finished with it. For the different kind of base work, we have different kinds of bases. The most usual type that you would find are the wreath frames. This is the old-fashioned wreath frame, which you're going to need moss, which has to be bound onto the wreath frame itself with your mossing string, and then the flowers are actually wired through on a double legging. If you're interested in that, then you need to get the tape that shows the Christmas flower arranging, because I've gone into that in great depth in there. This one, because the modern days now, we've gone on to the Oasis wreath frames, which are much quicker and easier to do. So I'm going to leave that. If you're interested, then, as I said, get the Christmas tape to have a look at that. This is the Oasis wreath frame. You can see there's a nice lot of Oasis above the height of the base here. It means that you don't need a lot of wires unless the flowers are actually very limp in themselves. You're going to need an edging, and there's 2 or 3 ways of doing that. This is the Leylandi, and you'll find this is quite a common way that you'll see most of the wreaths done, is that it's pushed into the bottom and made a ring all the way around here, like this. You can use it, you want a fairly thick ring, so you can use the pieces of Leylandi, cutting them in half and making one bit thinner, shorter, and then the next bit thicker on the top of it, so you'll get a good thick-ish ring of foliage going all the way around. Again, using the base ring of the Oasis just above the frame there to push it into. Don't push it in too far, because you'll come out the other side and then it'll split the Oasis in half, so you just want to make sure that it goes in nice and firmly. Just push it in like that, and you carry on all the way around. You've also got to remember to do the centre ring inside here, because if you're going to do a based wreath, this inner ring will show up. So you just go round the inside of the ring, following yourself around so that it's all laying in one direction. Now, another way of going around the edge is to use laurel leaves. The old-fashioned chaplets or the halos that they used to see in the Greek games were made of laurel leaves. And these are put on by means of pins. The proper pin is called a German pin, and they come in different lengths like that. The idea being that you can just push your leaf into the pin holds the leaf in the Oasis quite easily like that, and you can go round and make yourself a frill all the way around. And if you want to get them level, so you might not be level at this end, so you can, when you finish, you're going to cut them off like that, so you've still got your base up here to use for your flowers. So you go round in a circle like that. If you were doing a chaplet for, say, car racing, it's done in exactly the same way, except you use a chaplet frame and you pin the leaves all on top of one another in rows all the way around the frame. So that's the second way. The other way is to actually use ribbons. It doesn't look very good on a wreath. We don't normally use them for wreaths, but we normally use these for doing for pillows or for cushions or for the other type of base work like hearts. And these are literally pinned on the same. This is a box pleating, and it's pinned on with your pins to the frame itself. I'll just turn this round so you can see I've got this round the wrong way. It's literally pinned onto here with the German pins that pushes through the ribbon and into the Oasis. It makes a frill around the edge. If you haven't got German pins, then you can use the long, ordinary dressmaker's pins just to push it in to keep it on like that. You have to be careful, though, that if there are children around, obviously with pins, that they don't pick them up and put them in their mouth or anything like that. The other way is to actually make yourself a pin, where it's just a half, like a hairpin really. Just take your thick, well, these are the green coated wires, and you cut them into lengths. And you literally bend them in two to form yourself a hairpin. This will do for your laurel leaves It's not so easy for the for pushing this through the ribbon because it tends to split it. So you need to hide it underneath there. But it will do as well if you haven't got German pins. It will also bind in your Leylandi if you want to. You can keep it in with a pin like that as well. And I'm going to show you how to do this pleating. I'll just take this off here so that I can carry on with where I got to from here. Take those out. Put that over there. Right, now this is the thing that I'm not terribly good at. It's the thing that I always delegate to everybody else because my pleating has a lot to be desired. But it is literally making a box from the ribbon. And you need a stapler, and you'll just push the ribbon over on itself. Take the stapler, which I can't see, oh, here it is, and staple it twice, once on this side, like that, and then you bend it the other way around so it's flat on this side but it's curved underneath, like that, keeping it level, holding them together, and you put your pin in there. Now I'm never any good at getting them nice and small like that. Everybody else manages it perfectly and I have awful trouble trying to persuade it that that's what it wants to do. So once you get going you can go on quite quickly. So I have a template. If I haven't delegated it to anybody else to do, I have a little piece of cardboard which is slipped into the pleat so that it keeps it the right size like that. And then it's just stapled at the top and the piece of cardboard taken out. And put into the one on this side. It's far more time consuming, but at least you get the pleats the same size. And you can obviously make them any size that you want that way. Okay, you can see where it was all nicely neat before when somebody else did that bit for me. The way that I find the easiest is just an ordinary pleat, which is literally looping the ribbon once onto itself each time around. It doesn't look as nice as the actual box pleating, but it does serve the same purpose. So it's just a loop and a staple at the top to hold it together so you get a frill. You can actually buy ribbons now that have a drawstring along here, but they're jolly expensive, and if you're not going to use a lot of it then it's not really worthwhile. And obviously you can do these in any colours. If you're going to do like a red heart, then obviously you use the red ribbon. So it's just a bow and a pleat, like that. And then you pin it on as you saw me do before. The other things that we're going to be using are the daffodils. Now you saw earlier how I pushed them from right down here. Well, we don't want them so long because we're going to use them as an actual base. So I'm going to cut them off just a bit below where the stem has started from the neck here. And I'm just going to push the wire into this little bit, through this very narrow gate here, and into the trumpet of the daffodil. And cut it off, leaving a little length of wire at the bottom. Cut it off and just push your wire gently through the gap in the middle there till it hits there. So we're going to keep those on one side because we're going to do something with those in a minute. And the other thing we're going to do is to make a letter from the petals of the carnations. Now, sometimes the carnations come And you can actually, if you're using a big base, you can actually use the whole head, one after another, onto a wire, so that they're pushed into the oasis by pushing through there and making a pin like we did before through the carnation base of the piece there, catching it round, and then that will go into the oasis above the basing that we're going to do. And you can do one after the other and eventually make a letter from the actual flower heads. But we're going to do a heart later on, and it's not a very big heart, so I've only got enough space to make one actual letter from the petals. So what we do is we peel off the outer calyx of the carnation, a big carnation or the spray carnation, and you can take these petals off in groups. If you're clever, you can just pull the petals with the bit at the bottom where they're held together in a group. You'll perhaps get 3 or 4 from a spray carnation. Then we take the thinner wires. I usually use the green ones because they're not as thin as the silver, but they're thinner than the very thick ones. And then holding the spray carnation segment, I push the wire up through the actual coloured part. Now that's quite important, because if you get it too low, the whole lot just goes apart at a later date. So you want it not right in the middle, but nearly halfway through the actual coloured section. Bring it down as your hairpin and just catch the piece below it so that you've got it mounted on a wire, and it keeps it fairly close together, because you're going to need quite a few of these put together to make a letter. Show you again. Push the wire through the piece, the thick pieces where they come together at the coloured end. Pull it down, holding it gently between your finger and your next finger. Catch them round like that. Now they do tend to get a bit sticky, and you might find that they slide down, but the idea is to catch them all together as a group. Sometimes I put the bigger ones around so that it makes a more of a compact flower, and it's easier to keep the things together then. Through the coloured and down and just caught round. Right, I'm just going to clear the decks. I'm going to start off with a cross frame. Oh no, I haven't. I've got the dad under here to do. You might forget something. The silver letters, which are part of the funeral scene. If you don't actually want to do the ribbon and you want to do the silver letters, then you need to get, this is the wire that they fix onto. These silver letters make up any words that you like. You buy them individually. Here we have DAD for Dad, and all you need to do is to leave a space at the gap at this end, because you've got to put the wire onto that, and then you push the letters, the little gappy bit through the letters there and onto there. So DAD, you leave a gap in the middle so they're not too close together. Making sure you've got the right amount of gap in between. And you cut it off, and then what you need to do is to take a green wire or a wire of some sort and just catch it at the ends like that, because you're going to need to push this into the oasis. Don't need it too long. One on either side. That's a bit too long on that side. So you have the word DAD, Dad, and that will push into whatever base you're going to be doing. You could put it across your posy or through your double-ended if you wanted to. This is an Oasis Base cross, as you can see. You can also get it in the frame, the wire frame that we saw earlier, but it's more difficult to do like that. I've half greened it, which means that I've just pushed the Leylandii round as a fringe, and I'm going to carry on with this half on this side. So you need to split the Leylandii up into groups, keeping a nice stiff segment to be able to push in. The ends are the ends that you want the nice straight piece like that to make the proper end to come out. Now you can bring it out a bit further if you want to make the cross slightly longer. This is one of the smallest ones. So you come round the same as you saw me do with the wreath frame. Pushing the Leylandii into the edge like that. Make sure it's nice and good at the ends of your arms and at the bottom. Follow the contour around. You don't need too much in the middle here because we're going to put a spray across here when we've finished, so you won't need too much in the corners. I try not to waste too much, so I tend to use all the bits of the Leylandii if I can, by filling in with the thicker bits, with the thinner bit on the top. The idea being, of course, that you've covered up the base of the container, in this case the Oasis base here. Also, you don't want to be looking up at this and finding that you've got gaps that you can see through from underneath it. So when you've made sure that you've gone all the way around like that, and it's a nice finish all the way around, we're going to start off by putting in the spray chrysanthemums. These are the doubles that we had earlier on. They're the best flower for basing with because they're a flat top on them, and it's much easier to go around with these. And it looks more of a finished product than having the single ones, which tend to look irregular. You're going to need just the heads. And you will need quite a lot. Depending on the size of the cross, you could need up to 25 stems for doing some of the base work, which is quite a lot. Also, you need them out fairly well. So we start off by putting them in at the top end and bringing them round the corner like this. Now they've got to lay flat, just coming over the edge slightly. And in the middle we're going to put a row of carnations down. So let's just make sure that these are going to actually fill in the gap in between here. You'll roughly want about 24 carnations for a small cross. The idea being that you have a cross within a cross when you've finished. So that the white are the outer edges, but you shouldn't have gaps between in here if you can avoid it. So you need to gauge where your cross is going to be, where your chrysanths are going to be in relation to your carnations. Make sure your end ones have quite a longish stem on, because they're the ones that are going to get knocked when it's moved around. So you want them nice and level if you can manage it. This is even more important when we come on to the cushions, when they have to be dead level, otherwise it looks very higgledy-piggledy. If you find that the chrysanths have got a very thin stem or they splay out, then just push the wire up into the base of the chrysanth, as we did with the daffodils. Or if you wanted to, you could actually make a little hairpin at the top, just a little hairpin like that, and push that down into the chrysanth from this way on, if it hasn't got a stem at all to push up. That's gone straight into the stem, would you believe? Oh. Take that off a bit shorter. Should go straight through and come out at the back side. So you've actually made yourself a stem and it's stiff and the wire is just pulled into the centre. Don't pull it too hard, otherwise you'll find that it will shatter the chrysanthemum. You need roughly the same sized heads, otherwise you will find it won't be a level line down the sides, which is why you tend to waste a lot of the chrysanthemums, because you only want the ones that are actually fully open at the tops. When you push them in, you need to be fairly careful that you don't push the chrysanthemum and shatter it. You tend to get used to the actual how much pressure you can put on the chrysanthemum without it shattering. Final run down this side, and then we'll see how the carnations are going to fit in. Usually you need two along this edge on either of the two arms on this side. If they're very tight, you can just finger them apart so that they flatten out a bit. We're leaving a gap in the middle because we're going to put the spray in here. This is where you want to make sure that the gap is closed between the carnation and the chrysanthemum on either side like that. It's too long. It's a bit difficult when you get a joint at the end of the carnation to try and push that in, so you want to go on either side of it if you can. One at the end. And to try and make sure that this line is nice and straight as you can get it. And you've got your two on either end there. Now, if you wanted to in the middle here, you could put what they call a clump. It's an oasis with a spring in the middle which you can screw into it. I don't need to because I'm not making a massive spray and it's not a very big cross. Or you could put a little square piece of oasis in here just to elevate it so that you can bring your spray out. But we don't need to do that because we're only going to use roses in here. I just want a piece of greenery and a bit of gyp. This is a little bit of Hebe, but any fern or even the Lelandii will do. And you bring it out on either side to make a sweep across. It depends how big a one that you want as to how long you bring it. Obviously the bigger crosses have miles bigger sprays that come right out, because you can go up to almost a 6-foot cross if you wanted to. Just slightly on either of the opposing sides here. And because the roses have got a lot of leaf, I don't need too much leaf to go in, otherwise it gets a bit clogged up. I would recommend that you wire the roses like we showed you earlier, because they will take a bit of stick in the middle of here, and also it will save them looking bad if they droop. So you push them into the centre point here. Just wiring and catching in between the leaves. Oops. I'm not going to wire any more for time-wise because it's going to take a long time to wire all these up. Put that in the middle. Again, not too high so that it actually is going to catch anything if it's slid underneath the door. That one in the middle. A little bit of Gypsophila coming through from there. And a little bit of pink heather for good luck. Don't forget, of course, to put your card on, and you could put your card coming out of the middle of here if you wanted to. There we have a cross on a cross. The most popular things for funerals is obviously the wreath. We're going to do a wreath here based from daffodil heads, because you can get those from the garden, and some Tokyo chrysanthemums around the edge and a spray on one side. I'm going to start off, I've already greened it, and then I'm going to start off by putting in the gypsophila around the edge just to make the greenery a bit less green. Now I've got the gypsophila all round, I'm going to add the spider or Tokyo chrysanthemums to the edge here. Again, I'm putting one on this side and one on the outer. Trying to keep them fairly similar, so if I've got a fairly good heavy one on this side, I need the heavy ones then on the outside all the way round. And into the middle of that I'm going to push the daffodils that I had earlier at the same height all the way round, so that it makes what we call a based heart, a based wreath all the way round. This could be done with carnations, or it could be done with just chrysanthemums, as we've done on the cross earlier. Instead of using the cross frame, use the wreath frame as the cross frame. Go around the edge with your chrysanthemums and use your pink or whatever colour you want to use in the middle as your line in the middle. Or you can make it all one colour. If you don't want to use the chrysanthemums, the carnations in the middle, then use the chrysanthemums all the way over, just so that it's one colour. It's nice and plain, and you can put a nice fancy spray on the side then when you've put it on, to compensate for the plainness of the base. Don't forget the inner rib as well, because that will show up when you've finished if you haven't got that put in like that. I'm going to leave a gap at this side, because in there I'm going to be putting a spray that will come up slightly from the base here. If you wanted to, you could just use daffodils on their own without the edging at all if you wanted to, if you've got plenty of daffodils in the garden. You'd be amazed how long they last when they've been cut down as short as this as well. Make sure you keep your round shape, otherwise you tend to get an elongated one if you're not careful, as I was doing there, instead of going round in a circle. On the back then we need a spray, for which we'll need some thinner foliage, either some fern or a thin piece of Leylandii, and you can bring it on either side if you want to, or just across the middle. It depends which way you'd like to go. As the daffodils are fairly high, I think it would be best if you just brought it across towards the middle slightly. That's a bit high. Some heather. I'm just going to thin the heather down because it's a bit thick. It's better. And have a Singapore orchid for the back. Comes out through there. And some white freesia. And for a bit of colour, because you want a bit of a contrast to the base, I'm going to use the peach roses. Three of those, like that. Freesias are nice because they will droop prettily. If you got just a chrysanthemum base instead of these fairly tall daffodils, the freesias are quite nice because if you say you've got a white base and you've got lilac freesias, you can do a spray over this side and then put a little spray with a small leaf in a corner over here, so it links this one with a small piece on that side. It gives you quite a nice different design then on your wreath to start off with. For some easy base work, we're going to use the cushion or the pillow. Now they're fairly similar in shape. This is the cushion and it's square. Now the pillow, which we're not going to do because it's more or less identical, but I wanted to show you the shape, is much longer. Now these are both the sizes that are the small size. You can get them in a much larger size out here so that you can actually write names across here if you wanted to, either with the silver lettering or with your flowers, as I was going to show you earlier. Right, so that's the pillow, and this is the cushion. I've already just put in the German pins around the edge of the pleated that we've done. I'm just going to finish off by pushing it in through the ribbon and into the base of the cushion. This layer underneath here is hard, and this is the oasis that's been put onto the top. So you want it at the join so that it's going into the hard underneath to keep it on. And then when you get to the end where you've started, you just go over slightly and pin the two together, so you don't really see the join at all. So you'll end up with your frilling around the cushion like that. Or if you haven't got the ribbon and you don't want to do that, then put the green Leylandii or whichever other colour, whichever other greenery you want to around the edge. Now for base work, it's very important to keep the flowers level. For the outer edge, you've got to cover this bit here to start off with, is done at an angle. So you take the flowers, usually I start in a corner with a fairly small flower, in this corner here say, and push it in. Now if it's not going to go in first time, then you'll need the wires, which you're just going to have to push up the stem so that it makes it stiffer to push in for your corner points. These are nice and stiff, so they will actually go in first time, hopefully. And you're following the contours of the cushion itself. You're going to go round this edge here to the corner and then back round here, keeping them level and the same height going this way as well. And so you'll need the same sized heads. If you want to, you can get a bigger head in the middle, tapering to the smaller ones on the outer edge, on the points. And you actually push them in the same amount each time. Right, just got to the edge now, and you can see I've gone all the way around and it's fairly symmetrical like that. Now it's quite a nice idea to put a different colour in on the next layer, but this is rather a small cushion and it's not very easy. I haven't got very small heads on the chrysanthemum, so it's not so easy to do, but I will just put one line down here to show you how I mean, like this. Usually the chrysanths come with small heads, but just because I wanted them small, they've come with big heads this time. The small ones go in the corner like that, and you build them out. Now the idea is that you're binding on this layer underneath here. I'll show you better with the white one, because it's an easier one to do for you. That one's got bent. Try that one, that's better. Right, so that would be, if you can imagine, this would be all the way around like this as a border, really. I'll leave it on that side. Now then, you've got to keep everything level, otherwise when you actually look at it, it looks really higgledy-piggledy. So the smaller ones go to fill in the corners, and they sit on top of the layer that you've just put in, so it's really like a binding layer here. So these will all be flat from the top of these. And this is what basing work is. It is literally really doing a jigsaw puzzle with your chrysanthemum heads to fit them so that they go onto the block, following whichever line you've decided that you want, whatever pattern. I mean, you can do teddy bears, you can do all sorts of different patterns once you've got the hang of doing the base work and keeping it well flat. They're like mushrooms when you push them in flat. This enables you to write in between them with your split or your feathered carnation pips, and to do quite intricate designs with other flowers in between. It's better if you're on top of it, so that when you're pushing it down you can see that you're level, and you've got the centres following around as well. You haven't got little tiny ones and a huge head. Otherwise, when you actually look at it, it doesn't look very good to the eye. So if you come down to this corner and put your buds in down this side so that it fills in the corner. That one's gone floppy, so let's stick a wire up that one. You go in there like that. That fills that corner. Now I haven't got a big enough space between these two to fit one in here without squashing it, so I'm going to take that one out and find two that will fit into this gap here without looking too odd. That's it. I've already pre-cut the lengths of the stem, otherwise you're dobbing back and forth, cutting them off the heads as you go otherwise. I'm going to put a spray on this side here, so I'm going to leave a gap like that in this corner here so that the spray will come across here. But but you still need your one binding layer on anyway. Small one for the corner. That one's a bit tilted, so you need to keep them flat. You have to be fairly gentle with them, because if you have some of the varieties really shatter badly if you push them against the petals, and then you'll get a load of petals spread everywhere, and it's difficult to pick them up off the design underneath it, and B, you'll soon run out of chrysanthemums if it happens like that. Just fill in this bit here. I'm just going to leave this section here. It's fairly quick once you've got your flowers cut, and once you've got the hang of keeping everything dead flat, it's not too bad. But it looks very effective. It is reasonably expensive because the chrysanthemums themselves are fairly expensive per stem, so you're probably going to have to lay out £20 odd before you start just to do one yourself. Right, I'm just filling in. These won't show underneath here anyway. Right, then the spray's going in here now. Depends how big a spray you want. Really, you don't want a very big area. Otherwise you lose the shape of your pillow underneath. It's also a fairly good idea to have an opposite colour. So you could have, say, yellow in here because you've got a white bit here. And if you've gone all the way around the edge with your pattern, then it will pick up nicely from the centre here. I'm going to use the mauve freesias because they'll show up well for you. And also the Michaelmas daisies. I've used the ladder fern from the backing of the Singapore orchids that we had earlier on. If you've got a plant of the ladder fern, then you can just nick some of the leaves off. Don't clutter it up too much. No, I was going to put the Singapore in, but I've decided it will make it too white against the blue. There we are. That's the cushion. If you can imagine this without this all the way round, keeping those nice and flat, like that. This is a small heart frame. You can have what's called an open heart, where you only have the outer section of Oasis and this piece is missing, which is called an open heart, in which case you'll have to flute the outer and the inner side for it. This is the pleating that I did before with just the single pleat. As you can see, it doesn't really look so nice as the box pleating, but I've done it to show you that way anyway. We're going to do exactly the same as we did with the cushion. We're going to go around the edge, making sure that we're covering the staples and the line of pins that we've used to keep it onto the frame. So we're going to go around, as we did before, on the outer line, all the way around the edge, and then do the binding one on the top. Right, I've just gone round the edge, and now I've done the first bit of the binding in layer around the edge here, and I'm just coming round this layer here. Now, the actual heart comes in here, to make it come to a point, I've used some slightly smaller heads here. You'll need to do that, otherwise you'll find the whole thing will end up as a blob at the top and it won't look like a heart at all. The heart looks really nice if you use, say, a ring of red spray carnations in here to make a little border, and then cover in with the white as well. We're just coming around, this is the point of the heart here, which I'm just going to do with some smaller chrysanths here to make sure that it comes in still. And then I just carry on filling in with the flat ones as the binding edge. You can see that it's bound it in. You can't see the pins or the staples along here, and it gives a nice effect from where the red ribbon is coming down. I think red and white for a heart is very nice. Now we're on the flat and the level going, we can push the chrysanthemums in quite quickly. I'm leaving a gap here for some red roses for the spray. And I'm also going to do an initial, a letter A in here with the shattered carnations that we did earlier. And I'm using some smaller ones as I come to the point down here as well, to make it look as though it's more of a point. There shouldn't be any gaps between the chrysanthemums when you've done them, so that you've got a nice full carpet really of flower heads. This is where my spray is going to go, so I'll leave a gap. If there's a colour that you want and you haven't got the chrysanthemums in the colour, say you wanted it blue for instance, well they obviously don't come as a blue flower, and you'd be hard pushed to do something like this out of, say, cornflowers. You can buy the spray paints, which are flower dyes, and you just spray, you do it in white because it's a nice easy colour for covering, and then spray paint it all over with your colour. We have been known to use car spray paints because sometimes we have to do animals like a dog and they don't always come the right colour, but the spray paints for cars do. And as the item is only supposed to last maybe a week or so, the spray paint doesn't seem to hurt the flowers at all. There you can see I've just done the basing plain. I'm going to, I'll have to turn it around, I'm going to put the letter A in here using the feathered spray carnations that we did earlier. We need a point. Now it's getting in between these petals on the actual chrysanthemums that's sometimes a problem. So we want to find the point of the A. These are slightly long. You want to get it so that it's more or less level with the basing work, otherwise it looks funny if it stood out proud. With putting these on a wire, it means that you can actually go through some of the chrysanth petals if you have to, rather than trying to wriggle it in between. The actual flower heads, because you can always guarantee the flower head's right exactly where you don't want it to be. My greatest problem is to get the things to look actually even when you've finished with it. M's are incredibly difficult because you've got the bit of the M, and I can get one side beautifully done and then the second side doesn't go right at all. Look at that hedge right in the middle where I want to go across now. Whoops. The only trouble with doing floristry work is that your fingers and your nails get totally covered with either bits of oasis or foliage, so they always look black. So I apologise for anybody thinking I've got really dirty nails, but for close-up work it shows, but you can't keep them clean very well. It's rather a funny shaped A. Not sure whether that's quite level. Anyway, it gives you the idea of what we're trying to do. You can spell the word D-A-D or M-U-M. As I said, M's are slightly difficult to do, but it means that you can spell the letters out. Turn it round so you can, it looks like an H from behind here. I think it needed another one in here actually, but I haven't got any more wired up. So that's a fairly good way of doing it, other than using the letters like that. I'll just put the spray in here. Because it's only a small heart, we haven't really got an awful lot of room, and I don't think we want to use anything other than just the roses. So I'm just going to use the rose leaves by using them on the bit of stem and then the leaf itself as the spray base. I'm just going to put 3 roses in here as the spray. That's the thing with the roses, is that you can actually use the rose leaves and save having to worry about where you're going to get the foliage for the sprays from. Turn them around so they're facing the right way, like that. And if you wanted to, the dad that we made earlier, which we put on the end of the cushion earlier on, that just slots into here. Push it right in so that the green wire's hidden, and you can spread it out across there like that, or you could have it across the middle if you wanted to. You've also got to leave space for a card perhaps. This huge frame is for doing a prayer book on. As you can see, it's cut as 2 pages are with the gap down the middle. Now there are different ways of doing this. I like to see what appears to be words written on here. So to do that we're going to use yellow chrysanthemums with a white in between, so it'll look as though the words are written with a yellow on the white page. Another fairly nice way of doing it is if you've got a favourite verse from the Bible, you could actually copy this onto a piece of paper that's roughly going to be the size to fit onto one of the pages. This one we've got, "The Lord is my shepherd, therefore I can lack nothing," which is Psalm 23. And we're going to cover this in cling film because if you don't, the damp from the oasis will come through and make it all blotchy and everything will run. So you've got to make sure that you seal it on the back with the cling film when you've gone over, and then we're going to pin it into the corners. Now to cover the edges with this, we don't flute anything because it's got to look like a book, which is, otherwise it would just look like a frilly edge on it. And to do that we just pin the ribbon on straight like that, just direct, as you would do like wrapping a parcel up around the edge. Cut this side off because it's a bit higher here. So we're just going to pin the ribbon on. I'm going to bring it round the corner so my end isn't finishing there. I'm going to use ordinary pins here because they don't show up as well as the German pins make quite a big hole. So it's a bit difficult because I can't see what I'm doing this way up. Well, I'll go all around the edge and then trim it and then show you how I mean. And then we're going to cut the bookmark from the purple ribbon, which we'll need for the end. Right, let me turn this round. I've been round the outer edge of the pillar of the prayer book and put the pins in, and round on the corners here I've just bent it in and tidied it up so it lays flat. I'm just pinning in the last pin for the keeping the page on here, and the idea being that you're going to be covering the edge of it anyway with your chrysanthemums. So now you've decided that that is the way the book is going to lie. You also want to be cutting out your bookmark, which makes it look really like a book. So take your length that you're going to want. You need it a bit longer than the book, obviously. Cut it off there. So you need 2 of roughly equal lengths. And then at the top you do quite a gentle pleating movement to get them, because you want them to lay as flat as they will, but to actually come together at the end here. And then just catch the ends with the wire like we did for the streamers. And you want a piece so that you're able to twist it and put it into the book. And then at the end, cut out your fancy niche for the end. That pin there before I lose it. Right, so that's your bookmark ready. Now we're going to do exactly the same as we did with the other base work, and that is to go around the edge and to fill in, locking in the verse or the names of the people or whatever you've written on this page with your chrysanthemums like that all the way along. So I'll just go around the edge. I've got quite a deep one because this page has got to be done as though it's an open book, so that's got to be done fairly low down here. It's got to also cover and bind on your ribbon. And the next problem is getting the one that goes this way. You'll have to save some of the big heads so that you've got the one chrysanthemum to run all the way along here, binding this on and your outer edge as well. Well, we're nearly finished going around the edge here as the binding edge. And I'm also just finishing off this bit here for going around the page that we've depicted. Now, this groove in the middle is always a problem because you need to use the buddy bits here, because otherwise it just becomes one blob and you don't actually see the groove in the middle. So we're taking off the buds and using those. It's one way of using up the smaller heads that you're going to have on your stems anyway. But quite often you're going to have to wire these because the stems are too thin to push in very easily, especially as you need to angle them slightly towards themselves. Once you've got this bit in, then you can carry on going around the edges then. Right, that's the groovy bit in the middle. Finish binding this page on. In fact, I'm going to leave a little gap down there to put a rose head in, I think. Yes, leave a gap there for that. Once you've done the basic basing work, then all these things tend to be fairly similar, as indeed does a lot of the floristry. When you actually start doing it, you'll find it's quite a repetitious job anyway. On this side, we're going to use some yellow chrysanthemums as a pretend line of words, so that it shows up and looks like writing, as opposed to actually writing the verse out ourselves. You don't want to make them all the same length, otherwise the words would look too blocked in, or the chrysanths representing the words would look too identical. So you want one row that's quite long and then a shorter row. So I'm coming nearly to the edge, or to the edge with these ones aren't going in as well as the white ones did, they're bending. So I'm going to have to wire these up, which you might find you have the same problem with the chrysanths that you use, that they bend off at the heads when you try to push them in. Right, I've only got the spray to put in now. You can see that I've made pretend words along here using the yellow spray chrysanthemum as lineage, and I'm going to put in down in the bottom here where I left a gap a red rose. That's this bit of foliage, otherwise it would be lost without something there. Turn that round. You could put your spray wherever you like. You could have it at this corner or up here, because it's fairly plain and it's really depicting two ways of doing the things. Then this finishes this page off. Right, the only other thing we have left to put on is the bookmark. Well, I've done it in purple because it shows up well for the video, but you could do it in white or in yellow. this is quite a vibrant colour. What happens is that you push it into this top corner here, where the joint is, where your groove was. And you bend it so that it comes down like this. Now, that's fine if there isn't going to be a wind, but it is, otherwise it's going to blow off. So the only thing that you could do is to take a wire and to just clip it down to the petals here underneath. Now, if you've got a hot glue gun or a glue gun or even sellotape, all you need to do is to sellotape this, to make a flat piece and sellotape that to here. I haven't got any with me today, but if you just sellotape that along there and push it in, that will anchor that piece of the end of the bookmark down like that. So there you have your prayer book with your verse, and if you wanted to, you could put your card either in this corner or with your rose. This is the grave vase, which is usually used in a cemetery or a graveyard, either at Christmas time or throughout the year. It's handy because it's got grooves all the way around, so you don't need any oasis into it if you don't want to. You can just push your daffodils or whatever flowers and they'll catch in these grooves here. To actually do an arrangement in it is quite difficult, to keep it upright, so I've just put it into a block of oasis here to hold it steady, and push some old oasis into the middle here so that I've got something to keep the flowers and the greenery in with. Right, so mostly greenery is a good thing to use because it doesn't die off very quickly, and we can use the odd bits and cuttings that we have around as well. As you can see, they'll slot in quite nicely through these grooves here. Some variegated laurel, because that lasts a long time, and if it's at Christmas you can use holly, and the variegated laurel is nice as well to use with that. You have to remember to keep this topped up with water, that's the only thing, and if it's outside during the winter, of course it will freeze, so you'll have to watch that it isn't split, that the tin doesn't split and let the water out when it starts thawing. I think this is quite an appropriate vase to finish with, and I hope you've sort of enjoyed watching the tape and looking to see whether there's anything that you think you might be able to do on it. Although funerals is a morbid subject, in fact it's quite fun to be able to experiment with the flowers and try to use your imagination to do interesting things with them. And why not use them to a good advantage so that it's coming in for a good cause as well. These are the lovely blue iris. These will last outside unless there's a really hard frost. A lot of people are tempted to put pot plants out at Christmas time, and of course they don't last very long at all, but an arrangement like this with just greenery in it, or maybe some of the plastic Christmas roses, which look very realistic, would look beautiful, and it doesn't cost you too much. And some few holly berries. The Christmas tape's got how to do this and some Christmas wreaths on it as well. So if you want to do anything for outdoors, then that's quite a good tape to follow on from this. Because the oasis has blocked the middle in, it means that you can actually arrange the flowers rather than just pushing them into it. which is, it's an easy way of doing it. There we go. The last little bit. Now all you need to do then is to take it and push it into the ground where its points will push right in and keep the whole thing upright unless you have an astronomical storm to blow it over. There we go.